Hey everyone, and welcome to this lesson. In this video, we are covering global variables and local variables. So before we jump into the examples over here, I'm going to go ahead and show you a table that I just made that compares the two. So let's start with global variables. To simply put, global variables are variables declared outside of any function, and they have something known as a global scope. And what I mean by that is that you can access these global variables from anywhere in your code. They can be from inside or outside functions. Now, whereas for local variables, they are declared inside a function, and they have something known as a limited scope, which means that local variables are accessible only within the function or block where it's declared. So let's jump into the file editor window and demonstrate. Here I've already pre-written some code before recording. This is an example of a global variable, and we assigned this variable the name global underscore variable, and we gave it the number 5, and this is the integer. So we assigned an integer data type for this global variable, and let's refer to it. So I can print global variable, and let's try it out into the interactive shell. And you can see that it prints out the number 5, which is what we assigned that. And you can also refer to that within a function. So if I were to go ahead and put it in this function over here, which is function 2, you can call your function whatever you want. It doesn't really matter as long as you can refer to it. And then let's run function 2. And there you can see that you can refer to the global variable because, like I said, they have something known as a global scope. But let's try and do that with a local variable. So this is an example of a variable that has been declared inside a function. So if I were to print and refer to this variable from outside the function, so I type in local underscore variable over here, and if I were to run that, it will say that the name local underscore variable is not defined because it cannot detect it, because as mentioned in the table over here, it is accessible within the function or block where it's declared. Since it doesn't have a global scope, you can't refer to it from outside the variable. But if I were to call this function, because we have a command inside, we have this line that calls the print function, and it will print that onto the interactive shell. And since this is within that limited scope that the local variable has, it will work if we use this. So let me go and demonstrate now. So I'm gonna run the function example function over here, and that should work. And as you can see, yes, it did work, because even though we called it from outside, this time we simply called the function, and inside, within that function, is the local variable, and then we use that same we are in that same block when we call the print function. Therefore it's able to detect the local variable, and so it can print out over here. So you may be wondering why we need local and global variables, as to why won't we just do all global variables so it's easier to call them? Well, there are a couple of interesting points that I want to mention, and that global variables exist as long as the program is running. So throughout the entire duration that your program is executing, it retains its values, and whereas local variables, they exist only as long as the function or block in which they are declared in is executing. So they are created when the function is called, and then when the function ends, that variable is destroyed. The value is destroyed. So what I mean by that is that, remember how before I mentioned that functions, you can think of functions as mini programs within your program. So in this case, like I said in the other, like I said when I looked at the table, global variables run as your program is running. So they are running throughout the entire time that your program runs. And local variables kind of have the same logic. They are running, and they exist as long as the function is running, and once the function ends, that value is destroyed. So once this program or function ends, that variable is destroyed, it limits unnecessary memory usage. And at the same time, it also reduces potential coding conflicts when you have very similar variable names as well. So that's why we don't, even though it can be sometimes tedious to have to refer to these different variables, it is also quite important depending on the program you are creating. So let's demonstrate some more examples. Over here in function 2, I want to go and refer to this from outside the function, because obviously right now, if I were to do that and run it, it won't work because we declared that inside the function. And what we can do is do the global keyword and just type in bananas. And then before we can do anything else, we have to first run the function so that Python will know that it is global now. So you have to first run that function, and then it should be able to print out bananas. And let's actually get rid of this over here, because this print line is just simply going to print out this variable. So get rid of that line so that we just have these two over here. So let's run it, and as you can see, we can actually now refer to that from outside, and it prints out the number 10 as we intended it to. And let's go and manipulate this global, now it's a global variable. Let's manipulate that, so we can set that to a string value now. So let's do hello, and then we can print this, and let's see what happens. Now, as you can see over here, the reason why it's now saying hello instead is because it's overriding the original value over here. If you notice, like I mentioned before, Python programs run from the top and move down. So first it's going to call this line over here, so it will initially set the global variable to 10, and then later on it'll move down to the next line, and we updated that with a different data type. So now it's been converted from the integer data type 10 to the string data type that says hello, and therefore it is now printing out hello, even though in the original function we declared it to be 10. Now if I were to run this again, let's run this a second time and then print bananas. Oops. Let's run the program. Now it should now say hello, and then it should go back to the original value. Now because here's how it happened, step by step. We first called the function which declared the bananas variable as global, and then we went ahead and assigned a value of 10 as an integer, and then it went ahead and updated that to a hello string. That's why the first value, that's why the first output is hello, despite the fact that we initially called it 10, because that's our first print function. And then it moves down again to the next line, it calls that function again, and it redeclared it back to 10, and then we printed out that updated value. So therefore it is 10 for that. And here's another example of how we can manipulate global variables and local variables. So I'm going to go and run this right now. Let's do print global underscore variable plus 3. And I'm going to go ahead and comment this section out because we don't need this example for now. And let's run this program. Now since we are directly affecting an integer with another integer, that should just simply put it as 8. So that's another example of referring to the global variables later in the program. And then we can try to do the same thing over here with local variables. No, actually, no, let's not touch this. Let's go back to this one. Let's try that with the bananas variable. Let's do bananas plus 3, and it should output 13, but since we haven't yet ran that function, Python should throw an error message like this. So just know that even if you declare it as global, don't forget to first run the function, which I am doing right now. We called that function, and now it should work. And there you have it. It now takes bananas and adds 3 to it, and it should give 13 because 10 plus 3 is obviously 13. And also, one other important thing to mention is that code in one function's local scope, it cannot use variables in any other function's local scope. Like, for example, if I were to use let's actually create a new function. Simply call this function 3, and in this function, let's print the global variable. I'm going to comment these 3 out right now because we don't need them for this example. If I were to print, actually no need to print, actually just do function 3, so we can call the new function we created, and it should work because it is a global variable that we're using. Now, if we were to try to print this local variable from inside this other function, so let's try local underscore variable, it is not going to work because it's, like I mentioned earlier, code in another function's local scope, so this function cannot refer to the variable inside this because this is also focused in its own local area. So this function over here will also be focused in their own local area. So that's the reason why they each have their own local scopes, therefore it cannot refer to this other variable over here. So that's just simply one thing I wanted to show you just before we head to the recap section of this video. So to recap, global variables have something known as a global scope, which means that you can run and refer to that variable from anywhere in your program, whether it's inside a function or outside a function. Local variables have something known as a limited scope, which means that you can only refer to that variable from within that function unless you use something like the global keyword, and then you run the function after, where you can affect that variable despite the fact that it's been declared inside a function. And then global and local variables, separating them into 2, you can also save up memory usage within your program because, like I mentioned earlier, that the global variables will exist the whole time as long as the program is running, and local variables will exist as long as the function is running, and then it terminates those values when the function ends, which means that it will save up unnecessary memory usage. So I hope that summarizes up global and local variables and how you can use them within your program, and stay tuned for the next lesson.